Welcome to Markings. I'm your host, Ken Allen, and our topic today is the war and the peace that we hope to achieve in the Balkans. And if you were with us last week, we had some great background information to what has brought about this conflict and looked at various aspects of the conflict. And today we want to look at the role and the possibilities that the church, as well as other religions present in that area and present here in this country, can play in order to achieve some kind of a just settlement and a just and lasting peace in Kosovo and in Serbia. To help us do that, our guest is Dr. Rudy Siebert, who is professor of society and religion at Western Michigan University. Thanks for being here, Rudy.
Welcome.
And we'll continue our discussion again. I think Rudy was helpful in pointing out to us many of the factors that have contributed to the present situation, and now we want to take a look at where do we go from here.
Well, I would say in order to bring the churches in and their values and their norms and their codes and so on, and to bring the Gospels in and the codes involved in the Gospel, the Sermon on the Mount and so on, of course, the presupposition is the analysis, that we know, first of all, what's happening there, so that we don't put our gospel knowledge to psychological warfare or to a completely one-sided report. And therefore, it is important to see the facts as they have happened and in time, and where it is going as far as the future is concerned, and where there is a place for the churches to move in, because, you know, we very often have this idea that the church is part of civil society, it's not part of the state, it is private, it's a private organization, and we should not get muddled up with the family, and we should not get muddled up with economy, and we shouldn't get muddled up with the state, with politics, and we are supposed to be some kind of a contingency experience management system. That means we should hold hands for cancer patients and so on. That's of course all very nice, and we should do that. But I think that what the Gospels tell us is somewhat different from what civil society tells us.
Yes.
I think that the Gospels tell us that we do have a responsibility for what is going on, and that we should be more than just a contingency experience management machinery and so on to integrate civil society. So there is a certain diversion between what society thinks about the churches and what the churches think about themselves and about their message.
The tragedy of this whole thing is the people who in Serbia and Kosovo who are suffering immensely and paying a terrible price for what's going on there.
So the question is, of course, you know, what has the church, or do the church have the churches or the world religions done so far? And I mentioned the last time that unfortunately there is a secret letter by the Pope to the Emperor in Austria to punish the Serbs, and even if it means a world war.
This was back in 1914.
So, well, it happened also, you know, in recent decades that the Pope forgot sometimes to pray for the Serbs when he prayed for hundreds of other nations, but he forgot the Serbs and so on. So if the churches become part of the nationalities and part of the conflict, then of course they cannot be very helpful. They can only be helpful if they can transcend the conflict, if they can break through the in-group, out-group divisions of enemy and friends. And so on. Like for instance, story of the Good Samaritan, where the Samaritan reaches out and helps this Jewish victim and puts oil and wine into the wounds there. And so does not say, well, these people are not Samaritans, they are Jews, I don't help them or so. I think that an essential element of Christianity is this breaking through the in-group, out-group, practically, but also theoretically already. So that the NATO says, well, no, we didn't bomb that train. And then they say no for a whole week, and then finally they say yes anyway.
I think the train ran into the missile. Is that what they said?
Well, I mean, this is the inversion, you know, which the fascists very often did, that they say, you know, we didn't hit the train, but the train to Thessaloniki, you know, unfortunately ran into the missile. Or we say, you know, it was a legitimate target, but the refugees moved into a legitimate target, or they were moved into it. So in this case, always the victim is guilty. The Jews were not put in the concentration camp; they put themselves into the concentration camps. And so one has to be very careful. In the fascist period, the Gestapo could know a socialist always by saying concrete every 5 minutes.
Oh.
As soon as somebody said concrete, but concretely, I mean, then the Gestapo knew right away he was a socialist.
I see.
But you can also know a fascist by continually inverting cause and effect all the time. So, on authoritarian personality. So, nevertheless, the churches have to break through that in-group, out-group stuff first, and maybe take where both sides convert. Now, if the NATO finally, after 1 week of lying and denying, finally says, yes, we hit the target, we hit the civilians and so on, then we know it really has happened.
Right,
now.
right.
So there are certain things, tools which one needs to get to the
And
truth.
I've noted through this conflict, too, that some of the religious primates of Christianity, both Roman Rite and the Orthodox Rite, have asked for a cessation of bombing.
Exactly. So the Pope, the Patriarch of the West, tried to get the Western Easter cessation of bombing, of 72 hours or whatever, and it was flatly denied. And the Patriarch of Belgrade identified very much with the victim, wanted to be unpolitical and so on, asked for the Eastern Easter, which was 1 week later. It was denied too.
And this was denied by NATO in both cases.
Well, the Patriarch of Athens, of course, cursed, and thought we were Satan people, like the Ayatollah said once. And but then the Western Patriarch, the Pope, also said that the war was diabolical. And so we have a group of representatives, who were at the right place, but and dare to say something. The Pope did not just behave like a NATO army chaplain or so. He did take a critical stance, but the attitude of the NATO, of the whole liberal way is one uses the churches as a contingency experience management system, and when the faith communities become critical on the basis of their faith, one just doesn't listen to them. You see, this is it's a very Machiavellian, a very social Darwinistic, and in the extreme case, a very fascist attitude toward the churches. And the churches have to be aware of this.
Not to be taken in as we are in many
right. I mean, the Catholics write to the White House since the assassination of Romeo in 1980. Every year they send the same letter which Romeo sent to the White House, and they never get any answer.
No
answer.
So,
I mean, we have to become aware what the position of the faith communities is in civil society.
Prior to the breakup of Yugoslavia, in some cases like a city like Sarajevo, for example, where the Olympics were held, people seemed to, of all faiths and so forth, live, got along, work together, even in some cases perhaps intermarried.
Right.
Is there still, though, let's take, for example, Serbia and Kosovo. Kosovo, mostly this great Albanian majority, which is Islam. Serbs, which by and large belong to the Orthodox rite of Christianity. Is there a great deal of animosity that still exists between those two people, which prohibits them ever living together or getting along together, or living together under one rule, one state?
Let me start with Sarajevo. I have a good friend, a Franciscan Orthodox in Sarajevo. And he was in my course there in Dubrovnik for 25 years.
Yes.
And a very happy Franciscan. He was also a socialist. And of course, you know that St. Francis was a very communistic person. Yeah. He did not even want to have property for his order. And so, so he was on the socialist side. And when the war broke out in Bosnia-Herzegovina, he brought the Islamic people together with the Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholics, and wanted to have met them all in Prague. They went to Prague and said how they could cooperate with each other, in order to stop this horrible conflict. When they came home, the whole press of Sarajevo was attacking then poor Orthodox and so on, and he had to flee. He fled to Germany, and at the airport he lived in a little village and so on. Later on, he went back to Bosnia-Herzegovina near Mostar, and there the Muslims beat him up terribly. So then he had to flee again. Sometimes his own Franciscan brothers are very much on the right, so they didn't want him, and so on. So those people, who want to bring all sides together are sometimes sitting between two chairs and have a hard time, and But I mean, attempts have been made. Now, I think for a long time, Islamic people, Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, Protestants, and Jews did not have real discourses with each other, you see.
I see.
I think there can be no world peace without the world religions, but the world religions cannot do anything if they don't get together with each other and have discourse with each other, and they cannot have discourse with each other if they do not some research into their own belief structures and so on, so that they can really talk with each other. So, but this should have been done, of course, long before that conflict started.
Right,
you know, and
right.
If the conflict is there, it's very hard to do this. There were some meetings, you know, of the Western Church and the Eastern Church in Croatia,
Yes.
and so on, but it came too late, you know, the whole thing, and so. So it was very ineffective. And in the Middle Ages, we could say, well, we had the good intentions, but, you know, it didn't work out. We leave the rest to God. Today, you know, in modernity, it must also be effective. People will not take good intentions.
No, they don't count anymore. No.
Well, they should count, but there must be something added to it. I'm glad that we have good intentions, but they also must be effective.
To believe it, I must see it.
Yes, and they must be connected.
Results.
And they must be connected with a very detailed analysis in the territory there.
I see.
So now you see, there's not only the Albanians are not only a different religion, they're also a different race. They are not Slavs. So
I see, that I did not know.
Serbs in the Balkan, these are all Slavic people. And of course, this NATO attack now galvanizes, you know, the whole pan-Slavic feeling, and we will see that in the next elections in Moscow and so on, what harm this bombardment has done.
This is not winning any
including
friends.
including China, you know.
Yeah.
So, but it goes from China through the whole Eastern, and the civil society had already been stopped, you know, it's moving back there, and now this will do more harm than before. So you see, for instance, the Albanians do not want to have Russians in Kosovo because that is another race, you know, that's not their people. The Albanians say that Russian officers were in the Serbian army, and that is very much possible as advisors, you know, in the last weeks and so on. So obviously the Russians, you know, exercised extreme restraint, because if they had given the rockets which they gave to the Vietnamese, you know, against us, our air fleet, you know, half of it would have fallen down the first week and the other half the second week.
Yes.
But we would also have had the Second, Third World War, you see. So therefore they restrained themselves, did obviously not send any rockets in it, otherwise our planes would have fallen down. But they obviously, they may have sent advisors. That is at least what the KLA says.
I see.
So the KLA does not want to have Russians there. The Yugoslavs do not want to have those there who did the bombing and so on. So there are still a lot of things which have to be settled. But back to the churches.
Yeah, back to the churches. And as it is in this country, so perhaps even more so there, it's very difficult. We did mention the fact, though, that the Pope and some of the patriarchs have called for a cessation of the bombing, and certainly must include in their prayers hope for peace and resolve and pray for the people and so forth. But aside from that, I mean, are like
Jesse Jackson, you know,
Jesse Jackson was an example, though, of someone
of American Protestantism, you know, and it was a very courageous thing. He tried it several times. Finally, it was effective with our 3 prisoners, and he prayed with them, you know, in Belgrade. He even held hands with Milosevic. He helped somewhat, you know, to neutralize the demonization and personalization.
But many people over here were critical of that, too, of course, you know, for the wrong reason, but they were critical
of that.
But
you see, if we are critical and criticize somebody, I think only inner criticism is permitted. That means we can judge people only by their own values. And the values of Jesse Jackson are gospel values, right?
Exactly.
And other people, you know, we cannot judge him according to the Communist Manifesto or whatever. We have to, or according to the American Declaration of Independence or whatever. But he's a gospel man.
Right.
And he acted in terms of the small apocalypse, as this is called in the Gospels, you know, that to see the prisoners. He saw the prisoners. Or the Isaiah piece, I've come to liberate the prisoners. And that's exactly what he did. So in this case, he gave a beautiful example of praxis in conformity to the gospel.
Now, when people think of this conflict over there, too, some people will say, well, obviously it's a religious conflict as opposed to a political conflict, because Islam versus Christianity. And other people will say it's political. It's probably more political than anything, is it not?
Well, I
not
would
to
say,
divorce the two, but It's more political than certainly religious. The people in Kosovo, for the most part, as well as the people in Serbia, for the most part. Now, we're not talking about the extremes, the super patriots, the zealots, and so forth, can live together.
Yeah. I would say
you think so?
Yes.
Under
right.
certain privilege and law.
You know, if, for instance, Islam would have a discourse, you know, with the Orthodoxy or with Christianity, different paradigms of Christianity, and they could see to what extent they have some kind of a global, can come up with a global ethics, you know, in which they, the golden rule, for instance, don't do to other people what you don't want them to do to you. Don't bomb these people into the Stone Age if you don't want to be bombed in the Stone Age. At least all the living world religions have the golden rule in common.
That's true.
So on this basis, they could very well, of course, you know. But I think it is many layered. So there is a political issue. There is an economic issue. There are also religious issues. The Shiites who fought in Bosnia-Herzegovina are now part of the KLA.
I see.
And they are very hard fighters, and they cannot stop, and therefore they penetrate all the time, and which makes problems now for NATO, you know. So NATO has to restrain them. They help them with their bombs now. Now they have to restrain them, which will be very difficult to do. But you see, the one political or geopolitical layer is, of course, that this is the last socialistic state, you see. So the Western capital needs colonies. I mean, our colonies are in Central America, South America. Their colonies are in the East, or in the Middle Ages. That was Hitler's idea. That was Napoleon's idea. So Western capital needs cheap labor and cheap resources, and one gets them from the East. If there is a socialistic state in the middle and protects its workers, you know, they come and say, we need 2,000 girls, you know, for a computer, putting computers together for $1 an hour, or 75 cents or whatever. Well, a socialistic state will say that's exploitation. It doesn't let them come in.
Well, that's right.
So then they have to go to the Slovak Republic or to Poland. They do get the 2,000 girls somewhere, you see.
I see.
But if you have a socialist sitting there, he will be very dangerous. He will be a blockage of this colonization project, you see. And that is certainly one layer why they had to bomb into the Stone Age, you know. So now, of course, if they want to make something of that, they have to rebuild the infrastructure again and have a Marshall Plan or whatever. So, I mean, can the faith community be really a critical community? That is important, you know. I mean, critical now in a very constructive sense. Critical inspired by the Gospels, and can translate this into political analysis and political praxis.
Now, we do hear something occasionally from, as we have said before, from the Christian leaders, but we hear nothing, do we, from the Islamic leaders? Do we, with regard to, you know, what's going on and what needs to be done?
I mean, they were very much hand-off, but they have worked a lot in the camps.
I see.
So there is an Islamic Red Cross, you know, which has done great things there.
And of course, each territory and each one has a party line, to the extent that I guess when the religious leaders really speak the truth, as they are called to do by God, then in a sense they put their neck on the line too, don't they, with the authorities, you know. And so their stance is not to totally condone either side what's going on, but to be critical of both sides, it would seem to be, and be critical of the whole situation.
Well, I mean,
and apply the gospel principle.
I mean, one would see, you know, that every church leader, of course, has to see to the survival of his faith community. He has economic problems, you know, and so on and so on. He must adjust, he must accommodate, you know, to the NATO, to this country, and so on. But the question is, if the accommodation goes to a point where it becomes the betrayal of the gospel values, that is the issue. I mean, if you follow the gospel values, you become automatically a martyr. Now, not everybody is a martyr material. And therefore, we don't want to have this rigid type of extreme type of thing. But I mean, one should be able to strike a balance where one accommodates to civil society and at the same time is faithful to the gospel values.
Okay. What about us as Christians here in this country now, as we hear these reports and so forth? What should, you know, we should be looking at this very critically and trying to be well informed. What might we be doing to religious leaders, and as religious people, as Christians, I mean, and as other religious people too? What might we be doing here as Americans to change the course of action which is presently
See, first of all, I think it's a very simple thing. If we are Christians or not Christians, we are speakers. We are competent in our language. And as such, we can ask questions. If the NATO presents us every day with innumerable contradictions which are unresolved, then every speaker can say, look, that cannot fit. If the Yugoslav army should withdraw before we start bombing, how can they possibly withdraw before we start bombing? They would come out in the open and would all be killed. How can one say something so stupid? Or this agreement which we had before the conflict started, Rambouillet, you know. Can one ask any sovereign state that it gives up its own airspace?
Yeah.
I mean, would we?
No.
No, we would be very heroic, and we would say, no, we do not let these guys fly from Canada to Mexico.
How do we feel if all the people all of a sudden in New York decided
So,
to secede from the Union?
Right.
We went through that once before.
And so in Brussels, you know, once I saw this German general. First of all, I saw my uniform because I was part of the German Air Force. So I called everybody and said, my God, there's a guy running around in my uniform. But then he gives this report, and there's a British guy, you know, and they lie from the morning to the night. That means in terms of contradictions. As speakers, you know, and language has a certain logic. Everybody can see how this guy lies the blue from the sky. So then we could at least ask the questions, you know. Why does he have to lie, you know? So that would be the simpler thing. Before we come with all the great gospel, you know, the Sermon on the Mount and all this, there are these simple things where we say, look, tell us the truth for once. We are not, you know, immature people. We, of course, we want to be private and so on, but we are also citizens. We are citizens. And as citizens, not as bourgeois, but as citizens, we have a right to inform adequately. I think there would be many non-Christians, humanists or whatever, who would be on our side and say, yes, so we would have allies, you see. Because if we want to do something, we have to find allies.
Has that Rambouillet agreement ever been printed and textually in the United States press or anything?
No, nobody here heard about it. And, but the Europeans got it too late, 6 weeks into the conflict.
I see.
And they were very upset about it.
I've heard or read no criticism of that in American journals.
Yeah, but everybody who sees that must know, you know, that the NATO had to know that this was unacceptable by anybody in among 150 nations.
And so then the point of making such a thing would be to carry out your intended policy of bombing or whatever it was.
And another thing, you know, to bomb somebody in submission, he is not morally obligated to hold that contract, because it was forced. If somebody forces you into marriage, your marriage contract is null and void. And the same is if you, and the same thing in terms of international treaties, you know. I mean, if you want to bomb somebody into submission, why the hell do you need a contract at all? I mean, just apply continual force without the hypocrisy of a treaty.
True.
So, see, these contradictions, you know, should one simply with with a longing for the truth, as a Christian should have it, but there are many other people who are not Christians and have that same longing for the truth, and one could come together with them.
And I think our problem is that as Christians, we are in some ways maybe indifferent and lax. We are all caught up in our own nice, comfortable lifestyles, and while we say it's too bad what's happening to those people over there, we're not willing to make any kind of effort to turn things around so that maybe some kind of justice can occur in that area. And that's what we need to do if we are faithful to our calling.
But you see, it goes to the core of our calling, because it has something to do with eternal life.
Yes.
And the story of the Good Samaritan there, the precondition, you know, of getting into eternal life means to put oil and wine into the wounds.
Yes.
But what happens to those who make wounds? And we killed and wounded 10,000 people in Kosovo and Serbia.
And we don't think anything of it.
This will be not very favorable to our salvation.
I don't think so.
Yes.
I don't think so. No.
So that is, you know, internally, that is a very serious thing. We do not have any chance. If the presupposition of entering eternal life is to put oil and wine into the wound, and that is what Jesus says in the parable, then to do the opposite.
Well, I know, and certainly in the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, you know.
Anyway.
And we seem to be sometimes on the wrong side, I think. Or we're not at least critically looking at what's going on, so that therefore we can make proper judgments and respond responsibly to people who are affecting policy. You know.
I mean, we do not want to neglect, of course, the charity, and there will be a lot of calls for charity. So I will probably have a Kosovo fellow in my house and so on. So this is a very good thing. But I think we have to connect always charity with justice, you know.
Exactly.
And charity must not replace the justice which is not granted. So this peace will work only
There is
if
no
it is a
charity
just
outside
peace.
of justice in
Yeah.
the scriptures, certainly,
That's
and
right.
in the Christian
That's right,
understanding. Yeah.
So what we have to fight for is not only that we give charity, and we are great, you know how much charity we do as a nation.
We've done a lot of charity.
Yeah, but we have to see, you know, that we do not take charity and replace the justice which is not given, because that ruins charity then.
I've often thought to myself that prior to the beginning of this NATO conflict that we should have sat down really with these people in Kosovo and Serbia, with Milosevic and said, look, you know, our bad nature tells us that we're about to embark on a project that will cost us billions of dollars. Instead of embarking on this project of which we're doing a bombing, we'd like to make this money available to you folks and sit down with you and to build the infrastructure of your country, to hold seminars and talks and so forth, to bring your people together so that they can be understanding. In other words, to put all this money which has been spent for waste and destruction, wasted in a sense, to some good effort to resolve issues and to bring people to the table and to give them a taste, at least, of a security of a good life.
And Kissinger thought that was possible. You know, Kissinger was against this campaign.
Yep.
He said,
there was some notable voices
now
against
we
this
are
campaign.
in it, you know, and we have to go on with it, which is not a very rational thing, because we did this in Vietnam. You know, we had 40,000 casualties, and then we couldn't stop now. And then we ended up with 55,000 and so on. So there is a certain catatonic, you know, idea of politics sometimes, where one, and I think the inflexibility of the NATO has all components of a mental illness, you know, because, you know, one has to be a little bit flexible. I mean, this is even part of the democratic system.
I would think
you
so.
have to make some compromises sometimes.
That's life.
And if you cannot do this anymore, you know, there is something not entirely healthy about this type of attitude.
Well said, well said.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that our viewers, in listening to what Dr. Siebert has presented, can take a kind of a critical view toward what is going on, and not only become thoughtful people, but thoughtful spokesmen for what is going on, and speaking to the issues, and remembering all of this in their prayers, and maybe being leavens in their faith communities and helping others to look at this through the eyes of the gospel and through the eyes of our suffering but reigning Lord. So we thank you, viewers, for tuning in to this topic. While it is a kind of contemporary for this time, we hope that we've given you some handles to think about issues as they come up all the time for us Christians in society. So thank you, Dr. Siebert, for appearing on Markings and for your great contribution. And hopefully next week you will all, again, tune in. Thank you.